Welcome, everyone. I think you can all hear me. We're going to, even though everybody's not here, the General Assembly is still in session, but we're going to go ahead and get started because, we're going to have people coming and going. And fortunately, we are videotaping it, so if anybody misses a piece of it, we can share that video with you and you can catch up. Okay, so welcome. I think you are all here for the Small Business Employee Retirement Savings Summit on the crisis and the policy solutions. We're all here because we share a common concern. We're all here because we understand that there is a crisis. People are not saving enough for retirement. And I think you all are familiar with AARP. We represent about 1.1 million members and their families. We represent the 50 plus. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make sure that people can live the lives that they want to live as they age. And as you can imagine, financial security is a big piece of that. This past session, and I guess I shouldn't even say past session because as you all know, it's still ongoing. The major initiative in this sector that we worked on is House Bill 604, this bill that established a study committee to look at this issue. So you're going to be hearing from speakers across the country that have been looking at this from an academic perspective, various states that are working on it in their state, and you're also going to hear from policy think tanks like AARP does research on this issue, but also because of this bill, I found out that there are other organizations that are concerned about the retirement savings crisis, like the Pew Charitable Trust. And if any of you watch public television, you've probably heard of them. So we have John Scott from that organization. So I've only been with AARP for about a year and a half, so Representative Ross precedes me in this issue. He's been our champion and fighting for this issue for a couple years now. He is our representative from Burlington in the Alamance County area. He has a lot of expertise to be focusing on this issue because he's in the investment industry. He's vice president at Wells Fargo Advisors. He's also senior chair of commerce, chair of finance. He's on the insurance committee, among other committees, but he's certainly the perfect person to be kind of bringing this issue to all of our forefront. So he's going to come on up and say a few words, and then he's going to introduce our state treasurer. We're actually fortunate enough to have Treasurer Falwell here with us. Thank you.
Check my watch before I say good morning. No, it's good. It's good afternoon now for about 13 minutes. It's a pleasure to be here today. I actually had to leave session early to get here. I think it's still going on. But we're here to talk about an issue today that I think is important. This is an issue that has been going on. I've been in retirement planning really for the better part of 40 years. So I've had a little bit of experience with it, and during that 40-year time frame, I've had quite a bit of experience with the issue of the public or people not saving for retirement. I looked up a couple of statistics because these numbers change all the time, but just to give you an idea how this has gone on for really quite some time, personal savings rate in America in 2018 was 8.8%. In 2019, that dropped to 8.1%. Now that's a startling low rate, for our country. But how long has that been going on? If we look back to 1960, that number was 10.4. So in 1960, it was low, but it has only gotten worse over the years. 55%, according to Forbes, 55% of Americans will retire with less than $10,000 in savings. 42% of Americans will actually retire broke. Now, that's a critical issue because what that does to us as a society is it brings a lot of people into the retirement years with little or no money. So what does that mean? That means that they wind up on public assistance, Medicaid for one, and we all know in North Carolina and all across the country what has happened to the cost of Medicaid. And typically, when an older American retires, they don't have any money, they wind up in a Medicaid facility. And those numbers rack up, and you multiply that times the number of people in this country that are actually retiring. The aging population is getting bigger, and it's getting bigger for a number of reasons. Other issues in retirement are the fact that we're living longer. I've read a number of articles over the years about how initially when Social Security was created, for example, the average lifespan was just a little over 65 years. So if you figured a system back then or calculated the numbers for a system back then where an individual would only live maybe 1 year or two, it was not hard to make that work. But now with life expectancies approaching 90, 88 to 90 in that range, that's a lot of years to live in retirement. That's a lot of years to live without money, without income. That's a lot of years to pay public assistance through Medicaid. So it's a dilemma, it's a problem. You have to ask yourself, why don't people save? I've asked myself that for 40 years in trying to get people to save for retirement. Many volumes of books have been written and articles on why people don't save. I mean, we are a consumer nation. America thrives on consumerism. We're sort of I gotta have it now society. So it's, rather than save this year, I think I'm gonna either buy the boat or whatever it is that we spend money on. Other issues that affect retirement are simply the income gap that we have in the country now. It's hard for a family of four with inflation, to find a way to save. We do know statistically, though, that those that have employer-sponsored plans, whether it's a 401k or some other plan, we do know statistically these are the Americans that are more likely to save. And so as you peel back the layers to try to find answers, that's one thing that we know for certain, is that the easier the opportunity to save, the more likelihood that someone will do it. What I'd like to do now is just take a minute and introduce someone that I've known for a number of years. He was a former state representative, but beyond that, he's a CPA. And for those of you that don't know, that's somebody that works with numbers and does a very detailed work with numbers. Over the last 3 years has become our state treasurer, and it has been someone who's really peeled back the layers as far as numbers are concerned. Has done an incredible job. I've had the opportunity to work with him over the past few years as treasurer on a number of issues involving both our pension plan within state government and also our health plan. And I can tell you there's not a more dedicated person that I know that works with numbers trying to get to the bottom of what's going on than our current state treasurer. So I would like to introduce our current state treasurer, Dale Folwell. And as you're gonna see when he comes up, he works so hard at it, he sometimes injures himself.
Thank you for having me. Most of you who have heard me speak before know that I always bring props, but the only prop I have today is a sling. And so I'm actually, for the first time in my whole public service career, I'm doing a PowerPoint. So this will be really quick. The price of promises and the keeper of the public purse. And I want to thank Representative Ross for that introduction. And in so many instances of things that I have to solve at the Treasurer's office, I'm the mule and he's the brains that helps us resolve some of these issues. So I really appreciate your friendship and your professionalism and the integrity with which you approach the legislature. It's very important. It was mentioned earlier the folks from Pew are here. They're going to be in our building in a week and a half because we've been partnering with Pew, not only on the state health plan, but also on solvency of the state pension plan, as well as the stress testing the pension plan. And you're going to hear a little bit about that in a moment. While we're here having this glorious lunch, my wife, who some of you have met, and I say this slowly, so I want you to hear it, She's the cutest 250-year-old woman you've ever met in your life. The reason I say that is that while we're here right now, she is a tour guide at Old Salem, which is a 250-year-old community, and she has to go to work every day dressed up in the period costume of 250 years ago. I mention her for two reasons. The first reason is that when folks get up and speak who are public servants, even as important as teachers and troopers and deputy sheriffs and all kinds of people, it's really the spouses of public servants that put up with the lot of public service. We get to get up and give these talks, but it's the spouses of public servants, and I always am reminded of that when I think of her. The second reason is that in addition to that, she's a musician and an artist and a singer. So last night at our home, one of her bands was over practicing, and one of the band members says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I live here." So nobody's used to seeing me in my house on Wednesday night because that really hadn't occurred in a few years. But the reason is that anytime Cynthia does something for you, you can see it or you can hear it. What I'm getting ready to talk about in a moment is the invisible. It's not a tour. It's not a song. It's not a piece of artwork. It's not somebody playing the mandolin. It's the invisible. But these invisible things, as you're getting ready to hear, are going to determine the future of North Carolina and every other state and community across North Carolina. You never expect this from a motorcyclist, but the philosopher T.S. Eliot once said, "Hell is where nothing connects." So if you're as old, you don't expect that comment from a person with the last name of Falwell, but if you are as old as I am and you remember the early depictions of hell in Hollywood, it's where people had their arms extended and they never connected. And what I want to tell you is this is not hell, this is North Carolina. And everything we're getting ready to talk about, even though it relates to the people who are on the public pension plan and the health plan, it connects back to something that people do care about, which is how are we going to fund education? How are we going to fund public safety? How are we going to fund public roads? So the price of promises is very simple. If you'll go to the next slide. I've never done this before, so even with two hands I can't do it. Yeah, even with two arms I can't do it. So the price of promises. The state pension plan, or the amount of money we manage at the Treasurer's office, is the 26th largest pool of public capital in the entire world. 26th largest pool of public capital in the entire world. Nearly 1 out of 10 adult North Carolinians is on this pension plan, including many people, somebody at probably every one of these tables who are they themselves or somebody that they're related to. And on the price of promises, this pension plan is something that's very important behind our state employees, behind their health and their spiritual relationship and their family relationship. These things regarding health care and pension are the two most important things in their life. So this is the last 50 years of the state pension plan. And I'm wearing Harlan Bowles' lapel pin today because it was given to me by his son. And those of you who knew Treasurer Bowles, he was considered the best state treasurer not only of North Carolina, but of the 20th century in the entire United States. So I may irritate someone with the words I'm getting ready to use, but words matter. When Treasurer Bowles left office in 2000, this pension plan had 110 cents on every dollar. So when I used the quote from T.S. Eliot a moment ago, I want you to think about everything I'm saying regarding financial literacy as well as retirement readiness, which is the purpose of this conference. When Treasurer Bowles left in 2001, the plan was 110% funded. So what I'm about to say is not political or emotional, which is what's going on in the world right now. This is mathematical. Just a few short months after Treasurer Moore became the treasurer in North Carolina, our country was attacked, stock market was closed, and the pension plan lost tens of millions of dollars because of what happened on 9/11. And then Treasurer Moore worked really hard during his tenure so that the pension plan got back to a decent funding level. And then as soon as Treasurer Moore was leaving office, we were hit with the crisis of 2008. and the plan lost probably $28 billion as a result of that. Why should you care about this? The reason you should care is a quote that was given by Bill Gates 8 years ago. Now, you think about Bill Gates in our lifetime as a negotiator, going up against the Goliath IBM, as a philanthropist, as a billionaire, and you think about this. He was asked one time, what is the single biggest threat to public education? This does ultimately connect back to AARP and what you're trying to accomplish. Bill Gates, of all the things he's trying to conquer in the world, his answer to that was, one of the single biggest threats to public education over the next few decades is how states account and fund for unfunded pension and health care liabilities. Think of how everyone else would have possibly answered that question for him. So what you're about to see is what Bill Gates talked about several years ago. So as soon as Treasurer Moore left office, as you know, we were hit with a crisis, and now we have a plan that's about 88% funded, one of the 5 best funded in the United States, but it has some tremendous headwinds. Now, the blue line is where I bought my first home. I paid about 10.5% interest on my first home. And the blue line represents interest rates. And when interest rates, the blue line, are above the red line, it's easy to be the state treasurer of anything, because all you have to do is put the money in treasury bonds and you'll be successful. But as you've seen and as you've all experienced, the blue line has dropped to levels unprecedented. As a matter of fact, as many of you know, believe it or not, there's $17 trillion worth of debt in the world right now that's trading at negative interest rates, where people are paying you to take the money. Who would ever have thought we've gone to 10% mortgages to negative interest rates? That is great for buying a car, buying a house, financing a business. That's great for everything. But it is a deal breaker for pension plans that have a tremendous amount of money in fixed income. The green line, as you can see, when interest rates went up, the green line went up, which is the multiplier of what you multiply somebody's salary by to determine what their pension is. So when interest rates were going up and the blue was above the red, then they went up on the green so that the payouts were increasing. In this pension plan right now, we are spending $520 million every 30 days in pension benefits, $6.1 billion this year in gross pension benefits to local and state employees. That is more than the state debt, and that's this year. The red line is the assumed rate of return. It used to be 4%. Anytime that red line goes up, that means that people are more optimistic about what you're going to earn on the investments. Is this helpful to you? Okay, because if you can't talk about retirement readiness without talking about math. So what happened is that when interest rates went up and everybody thought interest rates were going to stay up and we had all this money in treasury bonds, then they went up on the assumptions of the assumed rate of return. So for about 35 years, the assumed rate of return was 7.5%. When I came into office 2.5 years ago, the assumed rate of return was 7.25%. Since then, I've lowered the assumed rate of return to 7%. Now, what you may not realize, which is the most perverse, shocking thing that I think you're going to hear all day long, is this. This pension plan, even though it's one of the best funded in the United States, has not achieved the assumed rate of return in 21 years. I just spoke to 400 students this morning at 8:30 at the Poole School of Business at North Carolina State. And during those whole entire lifetimes of most of those students, this pension plan has not achieved its assumed rate of return of 7.5%, 7.25%, or 7%. And I hate to inform you, it's not going to achieve it for the next 20 years. Now, I hope you're asking yourself, why would the treasurer be up here telling us that there's a return out there that he's assuming that we're going to hit, and we haven't hit it for 20 years, and we're not going to hit it for the next 20 years? This is the perverse statement to you. The better funded you are, the harder it is to lower the assumed rate of return. Kentucky or West Virginia just put out this verbose press release about 2 years ago and said they're lowering their assumed rate of return to 5.5%. Well, they weren't funding the damn plan to start with. You can say anything, but if you're going to fund the plan, like this General Assembly has done every single year, when you lower the assumed rate of return, you're less optimistic about what the money's going to earn, and therefore you got to put more tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in every year on a recurring basis. So the purple line is the blessed line. That's the life expectancies. When I was in high school in 1977 in Winston-Salem, we had 248 90-year-olds, and this goes back to retirement readiness and AARP. We had 248 90-year-olds and above who were getting a pension check from the state pension plan. Last month, it was 7,300 people over the age of 90. What makes all this a little bit worse, and what I haven't told you up to this point, I want this to be like a country music song where I burn you down and build you up and burn you down. I'm just not sure I'm going to be able to build you up in time because I'm getting the Carol Burnett over here. What I haven't told you is there's no minimum retirement age in the plan. And if you're a female in this room, you got great news today. If you come to work for the state, for example, right out of college, and you retire when you get your 30 years in, you retire when you're 51, you're literally going to be retired for longer than you worked. First time in state history. You're going to be retired for longer than you worked. So when you're dealing with a plan that interest rates are near zero, life expectancies are increasing. I haven't talked about Wall Street fees, and it's an important issue, but I won't talk about it today. Payouts are going up. You can see why the price of promises is becoming so critical. As a matter of fact, if you go to the next slide, how do you do that? Okay. You know, Warren Buffett's been my mentor for 32 years, and he said one time, he said, you know, you need to really work on having a good brain, but if you can use one of these and have a good brain, man, you got it all going for you, but I only have half of that. I don't have this part. So the number of retirees from the state pension plan, for example, we paid out 318,000 retirees, I think, last month. It's going to 468,000 retirees. We're now about, in the first time in state history, across the precipice of more people taking money out of the system that are paying in, the same little scenario that you've been hearing about for Social Security for years. So I just wanted to share these things with you at the Treasurer's Office, but also to tell you that whatever you're seeing here on that previous graph,